Beneath the thin veil of clouds, Earth glows like a pulse in the dark oceans, breathing, forests exhaling, deserts shifting as if in a dream. But what if this motion is more than chance? What if the planet behaves not merely as a system, but as a self, sensing, correcting, and enduring across eons? Scientists once dismissed the idea as myth. Now, evidence stirs uneasily beneath their instruments. This is the story of a world that may be alive, and the strange science daring to prove it. Whispers of a living world. From space, Earth appears alive. Swirls of white storm across its surface, oceans gleam in restless motion, and continents breathe with the rhythm of forests and deserts. To the human eye, it is a living mosaic, a sphere that moves, exhales, and transforms, as though guided by invisible intent. It is here, suspended in the black quiet of the cosmos, that the question first emerges. Could our planet be more than the sum of its parts? Could Earth itself be alive? The thought is not new. Ancient cultures once imagined the world as a sentient being, Gaia to the Greeks, Pachamama to the Andean peoples, a divine body whose moods governed the fates of harvest and storm. But only in the 20th century did science begin to revisit this idea, not as myth, but as a hypothesis. In the 1970s, chemist James Lovelock, working with microbiologist Lynn Margulis, proposed what they called the Gaia hypothesis. The notion that Earth's biological and physical components form a self-regulating system capable of maintaining conditions favourable to life. Their claim was radical that the atmosphere, oceans, soil, and living organisms are not separate forces, but parts of a single dynamic network. Early evidence came not from mysticism, but from mathematics and data. Lovelock noticed that Earth's atmosphere contained gases like oxygen, methane, and carbon dioxide in concentrations far from chemical equilibrium. By standard geochemical models, such a mixture should not exist. Methane, for instance, reacts quickly with oxygen, yet both persist in stable proportions. The balance suggested not accident, but regulation, as if the biosphere continually adjusted itself to maintain habitability. When compared to Mars or Venus, whose atmospheres are locked in chemical stasis, Earth stood out as an anomaly, an atmosphere seemingly curated by life. Further support came from the Daisy World model, a mathematical experiment designed to test Gaia's logic. In this simulation, black and white daisies grew under a digital sun. The dark flowers absorbed heat, the light ones reflected it. Together, their populations stabilized the planet's temperature, a primitive mimicry of feedback regulation. Though simplistic, Daisy World demonstrated how life could act collectively to sustain equilibrium without conscious intent. It was a metaphor for Earth itself, a system in which climate, chemistry, and life interwove like organs of a single organism. The theory gained depth as scientists traced the planet's real feedback loops. Consider the carbon cycle. When atmospheric carbon dioxide rises, temperatures climb, accelerating plant growth and photosynthesis, which in turn draw carbon back down. Volcanic activity releases carbon into the air. Weathering of silicate rock sequesters it into stone. Each process counters the other, forming a geochemical heartbeat that has stabilized Earth's climate for billions of years. Geological records show that despite massive disturbances, asteroid impacts, ice ages, supervolcanoes, life has persisted. It adapts, transforms, and in doing so, helps the planet recover. This resilience is the signature of a self-regulating world. Beneath the surface, microbes play a role far greater than their size implies. In the deep ocean, Bacterial colonies around hydrothermal vents mediate the flow of sulfur and methane, influencing global nutrient cycles. In the soil, networks of fungi connect trees across forests, sharing carbon and warning of disease, a wood-wide web that mirrors the structure of neural networks. Each organism acts locally, yet its combined effects ripple through the biosphere. The complexity is staggering. 1 trillion invisible decisions shaping the chemistry of the air we breathe. The living planet, if it exists, speaks in molecular whispers. Critics, however, urge caution. The Earth, they argue, is not alive in the biological sense. It does not reproduce or possess consciousness. Its apparent self-regulation could emerge from countless feedback loops acting without coordination. Evolutionary biology teaches that organisms adapt for survival, not for planetary balance. The stability of the environment may be an accident of natural selection. Lovelock himself later acknowledged this nuance, describing Gaia not as a sentient being, but as a complex cybernetic system, alive, only in the metaphorical sense that it behaves like one. The debate sharpened, forcing scientists to redefine what living might truly mean. Despite the controversy, research continued to reveal Earth's remarkable sensitivity. Satellite measurements show that forests in the Amazon generate their own rainfall through transpiration, releasing billions of tons of moisture that seed clouds above them. In the ocean, phytoplankton blooms emit dimethyl sulfide, a gas that helps form cloud condensation nuclei, influencing the planet's albedo and, indirectly, its temperature. Even desert dust, carried by global winds, delivers iron and phosphorus to distant ecosystems, feeding life across oceans and continents. Each process acts like a breath, an exhalation that ties one biome to another. The deeper scientists looked, the more the boundaries blurred. Earth's magnetic field, generated by the slow churn of its molten core, shields the biosphere from solar radiation, preserving the fragile chemistry of DNA. The tides, pulled by the moon, regulate coastal ecosystems that anchor global food chains. The cryosphere, reflecting sunlight from its frozen surfaces, modulates the planet's thermal rhythm. These are not coincidences, but interdependencies, the choreography of a system so intricate that distinguishing cause from effect becomes nearly impossible. The Earth does not merely host life, it is shaped by it, and in turn shapes it. And yet, even with all this evidence, mystery endures. The Gaia hypothesis evolved into the Earth system science of today, a discipline that models climate, geology, and biology as a unified network. We now understand that life influences atmosphere, temperature, and even tectonic stability. But the question of consciousness, of whether Earth itself knows, remains beyond the reach of data. The planet feels alive, but feeling is not proof. Still, something profound lingers in the symmetry of it all. The notion that our home world behaves less like a rock adrift in space, and more like a body that heals, regulates, and remembers. In the quiet between continents and clouds, the Earth breathes. Its pulse runs through oceans that trade warmth for wind, through forests that exhale the breath of animals yet unborn, through soils that remember the steps of vanished species. Patterns repeat like the rhythms of a heartbeat, not mechanical, but strangely aware, as if the planet itself senses its own fragility. From space, the shimmer of auroras ripples across the poles like nerve signals in a vast, unseen mind. And somewhere beneath that glow, in the currents of air, water, and stone, the mystery deepens, not in the heavens, but within the delicate systems that hold life in balance. Breath of the planet. Through the currents unseen, the planet inhales. Invisible streams of carbon and oxygen spiral between ocean and sky, cycling through every living thing. What appears as still air is in truth a restless tide of molecules, exchanged, dissolved, and reborn in continuous motion. This is the breath of Earth, measured not in seconds but in millennia, a rhythm sustained by chemistry and time. Within that vast exhalation, every leaf, wave, and grain of soil participates in the same unbroken circuit, a planetary respiration that binds all life to the atmosphere it shapes. Within the forests, this exchange unfolds with silent precision. Sunlight pours into the canopy, splitting water and binding carbon through the ancient alchemy of photosynthesis. Each square meter of green converts photons into sugar, creating the fuel that sustains the biosphere. Globally, plants transform roughly 120 gigatons of carbon every year, balancing the respiration of animals, microbes, and decay. The Amazon alone exhales more than 6 million tons of water vapor per day, a humid breath that drives weather systems across half the planet. From orbit, satellite sensors register this photosynthetic pulse as a subtle flicker of light, the planet's green heartbeat, rising and falling with the seasons. Across the oceans, another breath stirs. Trillions of phytoplankton drift beneath the surface, each cell a tiny engine of transformation. They absorb dissolved carbon dioxide, converting it into organic matter while releasing oxygen that escapes into the air above. This marine respiration accounts for more than half of the oxygen in the atmosphere, though much of it is reabsorbed by the sea itself. Ocean currents ferry these gases between hemispheres, linking polar waters with tropical reefs in a circulation that takes centuries to complete. In that time, a single molecule of carbon may pass through fish, coral, and cloud before returning to the depths as sediment. Here, the lungs of Earth stretch wide, invisible and immeasurable, yet vital to all that lives. From the soil upward, the hidden half of the cycle continues. Beneath every forest floor and grassland plain, billions of microorganisms consume fallen matter, decomposing wood and leaf into gas. Bacteria in the dark earth release carbon dioxide and methane, balancing the gases taken up by plants above. Mycorrhizal fungi thread through root systems in sprawling underground webs, transferring nutrients and signals between trees, an organic network that mirrors the neural pathways of a brain. In the cold tundra, layers of permafrost trap vast reserves of ancient carbon, frozen in time until thaw releases it back to the air. The soil breathes too, slow and deep, holding memories of climates long vanished. In each cell of life, the exchange grows intimate. Oxygen enters the mitochondria, meeting glucose forged by sunlight. The reaction releases energy, producing carbon dioxide that returns to the air the same molecules once drawn from it. On a global scale, trillions of these cellular transactions occur each second, linking the metabolism of single organisms to the climate of the entire planet. Even now, atmospheric scientists can trace the seasonal heartbeat of Earth in the oscillation of carbon dioxide concentrations rising through northern winters, falling again in summers when forests awaken. These patterns are not metaphor but measurement, recorded in precise parts per million by instruments orbiting hundreds of kilometers above. Across continents and centuries, another cycle winds its way through air and stone. The nitrogen cycle, less visible but no less essential, fuels the very fabric of living tissue. In the soil, specialized bacteria fix atmospheric nitrogen into compounds that roots can absorb. In the ocean, cyanobacteria perform the same act, turning inert gas into protein, chlorophyll, and DNA. Lightning flashes add their signature too, breaking nitrogen bonds with heat and rain. Each year, nature converts about 200 million tons of nitrogen through these processes, but modern industry now doubles that rate through synthetic fertilizers. The Haber-Bosch process, once a triumph of chemistry, has become an evolutionary force, reshaping the composition of soil, water, and air with every harvest. Yet even these flows exist in balance only because of time. Some cycles, like oxygen and carbon, complete within days, others take thousands of years. When plankton die, their carbon sinks to the seafloor, entombed in sediment that slowly transforms into limestone and shale. Over geological ages, tectonic forces lift these rocks, and weathering releases carbon back into the sky. It is a closed loop, but not a simple one, a system whose feedbacks hold the thin atmosphere within habitable bounds. Earth's history is written in these rhythms. The rise and fall of oxygen during the Cambrian explosion, the mass carbon release after the Siberian Traps eruption, and the stabilization that allowed mammals to evolve. Breath has always been the measure of change. Through this vast respiration, life and climate are inseparable. When forests grow, they cool the air by removing carbon. When they burn, they warm it again. The oceans act as both sink and source, absorbing heat and releasing vapor that drives storms. Even the great ice sheets of the poles, reflecting sunlight into space, regulate the planet's thermal balance. Modern satellite networks, from NASA's OCO2 to Japan's GOSAT, map these exchanges in real time, tracking carbon dioxide plumes and oxygen concentrations across the globe. The planet's breath is no longer invisible, it is quantified, modelled, and compared against deep ice core records that preserve its pattern across hundreds of millennia. Yet even the quiet air is not constant. Since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, atmospheric carbon dioxide has risen from 280 parts per million to over 420, a change detectable in the isotopic fingerprints of fossil carbon. This shift, though invisible to the naked eye, represents billions of tons of altered chemistry. Nitrogen runoff from agriculture creates oceanic dead zones. Methane from thawing permafrost amplifies warming. The equilibrium of ages trembles as feedback accelerates beyond their natural pace. The breath of the planet, once slow and steady, now quickens under the weight of its own creation. And still, beneath the quiet of clouds and seas, the breath of Earth changes. With every pulse of chlorophyll and tide, life rewrites the chemistry of its host, turning balance into transformation. The planet does not simply breathe, it learns new rhythms, sculpted by the living pulse it sustains. The architects of equilibrium. From the quiet pulse of breath to the tangible architecture of existence, the camera drifts across a mosaic of living forms that shape more than they inhabit. Life, it seems, is not content merely to survive. It molds, rearranges, and reinforces the foundations of the world itself. Beneath this truth lies a profound symmetry, the Earth and its organisms as co-engineers of stability, each gesture of growth, a blueprint written in chemistry and time. Across tidal flats and ancient lagoons, microbial mats stretch like veined carpets, the descendants of architects that first learned to build with sunlight. These cyanobacteria, thriving over 3 billion years ago, formed stromatolites, layered domes of calcium carbonate that stand as the oldest biological monuments on Earth. Within their delicate laminae lie fossilized whispers of oxygenation, the chemical revolution that transformed an anoxic planet into one capable of supporting complex life. Geochemical records in banded iron formations mark this transformation. As oxygen bound with iron in the oceans, red layers of hematite settled onto the seafloor, signaling the first great collaboration between life and rock. Through the coral gardens of shallow seas, the same principle endures. Coral polyps, no larger than a pinhead, secrete calcium carbonate to build vast reef structures, living fortresses that regulate ocean chemistry and cradle biodiversity. The Great Barrier Reef, visible from orbit, is the largest biogenic structure on the planet, a cathedral of symbiosis between coral and the photosynthetic algae known as zooxanthellae. Their relationship not only maintains local ecosystems but also stabilizes global carbon cycles by locking carbon into limestone. Reef cores reveal annual growth rings that track centuries of temperature and acidity, a biological chronicle of environmental change written in stone. Within the damp stillness of forests, roots weave through the soil like an underground tapestry of intention. Mycorrhizal fungi connect trees across entire landscapes, forming what scientists call the wood wide web. Through this network, nutrients, hormones, and even distress signals move between species, redistributing carbon and nitrogen in a system of reciprocity. Soil studies show that forests with richer fungal diversity are more resistant to drought and disease, a living infrastructure that moderates not only its own survival, but the atmospheric composition above. Each exhalation of oxygen, each absorption of carbon, is calibrated by these invisible architects. In the open oceans, planktonic engineers drift in uncountable billions. Diatoms and coccolithophores, microscopic algae encased in glass or calcite, bloom across the photic zone, drawing down carbon dioxide and sinking it into the abyssal depths when they die. This biological pump moves nearly 10 gigatons of carbon from the atmosphere to the seafloor each year. Satellite spectrometry detects their global signatures as shifting hues of turquoise and emerald, an ever-changing skin that breathes for the planet. Over geological timescales, their accumulation forms chalk and shale deposits, the white cliffs of Dover standing as a testament to their ancient labour. From deserts to wetlands, the pattern persists. Wherever life appears, it organises, conditions, and sustains. In salt marshes, halophytic grasses slow tidal flows and trap sediments, creating buffers against storm surges and breeding grounds for countless species. In mangrove forests, tangled roots capture silt and carbon, securing more organic matter per hectare than most tropical rainforests. Ecologists estimate that coastal vegetative systems sequester up to 1,000 teragrams of carbon annually, an essential counterbalance to human emissions. The shapes of coastlines themselves, seen from satellite imagery, bear the signature of these living engineers. Within the rock cycle, biology leaves fingerprints still deeper. Lichens, those symbiotic unions of fungi and algae, colonize bare stone and release organic acids that slowly dissolve minerals, freeing nutrients that feed the first soils. In this chemical weathering lies a feedback system. The faster the climate warms, the more rapidly biological weathering occurs, drawing down atmospheric carbon dioxide and restoring equilibrium. Geological models suggest that such feedbacks have moderated Earth's climate for hundreds of millions of years, preventing runaway greenhouse or icehouse conditions. In essence, the biosphere operates as both thermostat and sculptor. Across the millennia, evolution has refined this engineering. Beavers redirect rivers to create wetlands that filter water and foster new habitats. Termites construct mounds that regulate internal temperature through natural convection, inspiring biomimetic architecture. Even microscopic foraminifera, encased in shells of calcium carbonate, influence ocean alkalinity as they sink. Each organism, from the smallest to the grandest, participates in a self-regulating geometry, a collective act of design, not driven by intention, but by feedback and survival. From the perspective of planetary system science, these biological interventions form what researchers now call Gaian feedback loops, processes in which life stabilizes environmental parameters conducive to its continuation. Daisy world models, first proposed by James Lovelock and Andrew Watson in the 1980 seconds, simulate this balance mathematically. Simple organisms with different albedos alter planetary temperature by reflecting or absorbing sunlight, showing how feedback alone can maintain equilibrium without conscious direction. In real ecosystems, similar dynamics operate between vegetation, cloud formation, and heat exchange. Observations of evapotranspiration from the Amazon demonstrate how forests generate their own rainfall, creating a regional climate engine that sustains itself. Yet equilibrium is never static. It wavers, shifts, and recalibrates through catastrophe and renewal. Mass extinctions erase old architectures, but new builders emerge to take their place. After the Permian collapse, reef systems reconstructed themselves through sponges and rudest bivalves before corals reclaimed dominance. The Cretaceous saw plankton diversify explosively, re-establishing oceanic carbon regulation within a few million years. In every epoch, the biosphere's resilience stems from this capacity to rebuild, not from design, but from the deep logic of self-organization. Within the modern biosphere, this ancient architecture continues to adapt under new pressures. Human activity now rivals geological forces in reshaping cycles of carbon, nitrogen, and water. The term Anthropocene captures this transformation, a planetary state in which one species has become an active participant in and disruptor of Gaian equilibrium. Satellites track shrinking mangroves, bleaching reefs, and atmospheric anomalies in carbon flux. Yet amid the disruption, microbes still fix nitrogen in flooded rice fields, and algae still photosynthesize along the equatorial seas. The planet's architects persist, though their blueprints strain under imbalance. So the story of life as a builder carries a paradox, creation intertwined with vulnerability. Every reef, forest, and cloud speaks to collaboration, but also to fragility when the balance tips too far. The camera moves from coral polyps glowing under moonlight to the flicker of industrial lights along the coast, the two forms of construction sharing a single horizon. Somewhere between them, equilibrium trembles. What happens when the architects lose control of their own design? The planet that fights back. When the architects faltered, the planet stirred. Across its surface, equilibrium trembled and then shifted as though the earth itself inhaled before a vast correction. The camera glides over desolate plains and frozen seas, the pulse of survival quickening beneath the crust. From deep within the rock record, the story emerges. When life and climate slip out of harmony, the planet does not remain silent. It reacts chemically, climatically, and sometimes catastrophically. As carbon thickened the ancient skies, the Earth's first great crisis unfolded. Around 2.4 billion years ago, the Great Oxygenation Event disrupted an anoxic equilibrium that had persisted for eons. Photosynthetic bacteria filled the atmosphere with oxygen, poisoning the very organisms that had created it. Iron-rich oceans rusted into red sediments, and methane, once abundant, was oxidized into carbon dioxide. The greenhouse veil thinned, sunlight reflected more strongly from cooling clouds, and glaciers spread from the poles toward the equator. Geological data from South African banded iron formations and Canadian glacial deposits show that ice may have reached the tropics, the planet's first snowball Earth. It was not extinction alone, but purification, a kind of planetary fever burning away instability. Through the long silence that followed, the world learned new rhythms. After each freeze, volcanism released carbon dioxide, thawing the global ocean and restoring chemical balance. Carbon isotope records in Neoproterozoic carbonates trace this oscillation, a slow exhalation of gas from the mantle, countering the reflective grip of ice. These ancient feedbacks suggest that climate, atmosphere, and lithosphere were bound in a dynamic dialogue. The planet had begun to self-regulate, not by will, but by reaction. When the Cambrian seas burst with new life, equilibrium wavered again. The proliferation of burrowing organisms oxygenated marine sediments, altering nutrient flows and releasing trace metals that fueled more productivity. This feedback intensified biological activity and, with it, atmospheric instability. Each expansion of life carried the seed of disturbance. The fossil record marks these fluctuations in isotopic excursions, fingerprints of planetary stress encoded in limestone and shale. The Earth adjusted with slow precision, its surface chemistry reshaping itself to contain the excesses of vitality it had unleashed. As continents assembled into Pangaea, balance shifted once more. The late Permian saw the planet's most devastating crisis, the Great Dying. Massive volcanic eruptions in Siberia flooded the atmosphere with carbon dioxide and sulfur aerosols, driving rapid warming, followed by acid rain and ocean anoxia. Geochemical proxies from marine sediments reveal a collapse of carbonate deposition, signaling that the oceans themselves had turned toxic. Methane clathrates released from the sea floor compounded the chaos, amplifying greenhouse effects. Yet in this convulsion lay another act of resistance. Weathering rates accelerated, minerals drew carbon from the air, and microbial communities began to recolonize the desolation. Within 10 million years, the biosphere had rewoven the threads of equilibrium. After each catastrophe, the planet's feedback loops grew more intricately. When the Chicxulub impact darkened the skies 66 million years ago, photosynthesis faltered and temperatures plummeted. But within a few centuries, carbon cycling resumed as ferns reclaimed the ash-covered ground. Pollen analysis from Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary layers reveals the speed of this recovery. The Earth's circulatory systems, the oceans, atmosphere, and living biomass adjusted like organs responding to trauma. To an observer outside time, these cycles would look less like chaos and more like resilience. Across glacial epochs, the planet's pulse quickened and slowed with orbital rhythm. Milankovitch cycles subtle variations in Earth's tilt, eccentricity, and precession modulated sunlight distribution, triggering ice ages and interglacial thaws. Oxygen isotope ratios from foraminifera shells drilled from ocean sediments chronicle these swings over the past 2.6 million years. Ice sheets grew and retreated with mathematical grace, regulating ocean salinity and carbon sequestration. The Earth appeared to breathe in cold and exhale warmth, stabilizing its temperature within narrow bounds favorable to life. Within the last million years, this balancing act became ever more sensitive. When volcanic eruptions, like Toba or Tambora, spewed aerosols into the stratosphere, global cooling followed within months. Tree ring data and sulfate layers in ice cores record these sudden climatic dips, reminders of the atmosphere's delicate thresholds. And yet, life endured, forests regrew, monsoons resumed, and the carbon cycle restored its ancient rhythm. Even catastrophe was absorbed into the system's design, its turbulence part of a self-correcting whole. In modern climate models, scientists trace this behavior through feedback coefficients and stability thresholds. The albedo effect, the carbon silicate weathering cycle, and oceanic heat uptake all behave like regulatory loops. When temperatures rise, weathering accelerates, drawing down carbon dioxide. When cooling dominates, volcanic outgassing compensates. It is an intricate system of checks and balances, extending from molecular reactions to tectonic drift. The mathematics of these feedbacks mimic homeostasis, the same principle that stabilizes living organisms. This resemblance is not metaphorical, it is mechanistic, measurable, and precise. Yet the resemblance raises a deeper question. How much disturbance can a system endure before its corrections fail? Paleoclimatic data suggest thresholds beyond which feedbacks amplify rather than dampen instability. The Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, 56 million years ago, saw temperatures surge by 5 degrees Celsius within a few millennia, likely from massive methane release. Recovery took over 150,000 years, evidence that even Earth's self-regulation can be overwhelmed. In this fragility lies both awe and warning. Resilience is not invincibility. Across all these epochs, the planet's behavior mirrors a living reflex, not conscious, but systemic. Carbon dioxide behaves like breath, glaciation like fever, and extinction like an immune response. When the imbalance grows severe, the Earth purges and rebuilds. This pattern is visible in stratigraphic boundaries, in isotope curves, and in the fossil record's rhythms of rise and collapse. The same planetary mechanisms that sustain life can, under stress, destroy it to restore the whole. As the narrative returns to the present, satellite observations reveal the planet responding once again. Polar ice melts, sea levels rise, and permafrost releases methane, amplifying feedbacks already underway. Vegetation zones shift poleward, altering albedo and moisture distribution. The data echo ancient precedence systems, recalibrating under duress. For scientists studying Earth system dynamics, this is not just climate change. It is another cycle of resistance, scaled to the Anthropocene. Still, through all the ages, the question remains unresolved. Are these processes mere chemistry, or do they constitute something more? The camera lingers on the swirling clouds of a satellite image, their motions steady, their patterns recursive and precise. The Earth continues to react not with intention, but with persistence. Its feedbacks whisper a pattern that feels eerily familiar, like the breath and pulse of a colossal organism. Perhaps it does not fight in the way life does, yet its struggle bears the same logic. To survive through adaptation, the question of aliveness, the image holds, and the planet turns, clouds curling like tendrils of slow thought. And from that pattern arises the question scientists cannot escape. If Earth behaves like a living system, does it, in any sense, live? In the late 20th century, that question took form in the mind of an atmospheric chemist orbiting above the clouds. James Lovelock, working with NASA to design instruments for detecting life on Mars, realized that the same tools might already hold an answer closer to home. When he analyzed Earth's own atmosphere, he found something extraordinary. It was chemically unstable, far from equilibrium. The coexistence of oxygen, methane, and nitrogen gases that should annihilate one another hinted at an active regulation, a system sustaining conditions ideal for life. To Lovelock, this was not a coincidence of chemistry, but evidence of a planet maintaining its own balance. He called this concept the Gaia hypothesis, named after the Greek goddess of Earth, and it suggested something radical, that life and the planet form a single self-regulating entity. Oceans, rocks, air, and organisms together act as feedback loops, adjusting temperature, composition, and climate to keep conditions within habitable limits. Volcanoes, forests, and plankton became not isolated agents, but components of a vast metabolism, exchanging matter and energy across global scales. To test this bold vision, Lovelock and biologist Andrew Watson created a simple model daisy world. On a hypothetical planet orbiting a sun of variable brightness, two types of daisies, black and white, competed for space. Dark daisies absorbed heat. Light ones reflected it. As the star's output changed, the mix of daisies adjusted automatically, cooling or warming the world to maintain a near constant temperature. The model showed how even simple feedback between life and environment could create stability without any central control. Skeptics argued that Earth's balance could be explained purely through physics and chemistry without invoking life. Yet evidence from paleoclimatology began to challenge that reduction. Through billions of years of solar brightening, Earth's surface temperature has remained remarkably stable, even as the sun has grown 30% more luminous. Carbon dioxide concentrations, tracked through isotope ratios in ancient limestones, show compensatory decreases over time, as if the planet countered the rising solar output by drawing greenhouse gases from the air. This long-term thermostat effect, maintained across eons, mirrors the metabolic stability of living organisms. Other planetary comparisons strengthen the argument. Mars, thin and oxidized, and Venus, choked in carbon dioxide, both show what happens when feedbacks fail. In contrast, Earth remains dynamic and restless. Every breath of oxygen, every seasonal pulse of carbon, hints at an internal regulation. The biosphere alters the atmosphere, which alters the oceans, which reshape the biosphere again, a recursive cycle that resembles respiration on a planetary scale. From a thermodynamic perspective, physicists have asked whether this could fit within the formal definition of life. Erwin Schrödinger, in his 1944 work What is Life?, proposed that organisms maintain their order by feeding on negative entropy, extracting usable energy to resist decay. Earth itself, when analysed through global energy balance, appears to perform a similar act. It absorbs low-entropy solar radiation, emits higher entropy infrared heat, and, in the process, sustains gradients of temperature, chemistry, and pressure that drive circulation and evolution. But metabolism alone is not the whole story. Biologists define life through three criteria: metabolism, homeostasis, and reproduction. Earth seems to satisfy the first two. It processes energy and regulates internal states, but reproduction remains absent. Planets do not divide or replicate, though astrobiologists sometimes note that ecosystems do reproduce, in a sense, through colonization and succession. Life continually regenerates itself across generations, preserving the global system even as its components die. In this way, Earth may not reproduce as a body, but as a biosphere, an unbroken lineage of living processes, sustained over billions of years. Still, the debate remains unresolved. Critics warn against anthropomorphizing geology or mistaking feedback for intent. Yet, in systems theory, the distinction between living and non-living becomes less clear. Complex adaptive systems, from cells to economies to climate networks, share emergent properties. They evolve, stabilize, and self-correct. In that light, Earth's capacity to sustain habitable conditions through catastrophe and change begins to resemble not agency, but adaptation, a trait central to all life. To understand this scientifically, modern Earth system science has reframed the planet as a coupled organism of cycles and fluxes. Carbon budgets, nutrient flows, and heat transport are simulated like physiological pathways, revealing how disturbances in one domain ripple through the rest. The system's stability emerges not from control, but from feedback. forests absorbing carbon that oceans release, ice reflecting sunlight that clouds modulate. In recent decades, satellite data have turned this metaphor into a measurable structure. Each northern summer, carbon dioxide falls as vegetation blooms. Each winter, it rises again as decay returns carbon to the air. The signal is so regular that it is now treated as the pulse of the planet, a quantifiable rhythm of life's influence on air. Yet, as Earth warms and feedback strains, scientists are asking whether this self-regulation can persist. The melting of permafrost, the acidification of oceans, and the decline of forests may be shifting the balance from homeostasis to instability. If Gaia once maintained equilibrium, she may now be faltering, not dying, but changing phase. The feedback that once preserved life might, under new pressures, accelerate its undoing. The philosophical question then returns, but sharper now, framed in data rather than myth. What does it mean to call something alive? Is it merely to meet biochemical criteria, or to participate in a self-sustaining order? Some researchers propose expanding the definition to include any system that maintains itself through feedback and energy flow from microbial mats to entire biospheres. In that sense, life might not be a property, but a continuum, a gradient of organization from inert to responsive. Perhaps the planet's vitality lies not in its pulse, but in its pattern. To seek proof of life on Earth is to seek evidence of balance itself, measurable, testable, reproducible. The next step is not belief, but detection, to look for the numbers that reveal whether Gaia truly breathes. The data that shouldn't exist. The data came first, not theory and not myth. Rows of numbers scrolling across paper, whispering contradictions no one expected. Instruments, built to seek alien life, had turned their gaze homeward, and what they found defied chemistry itself. In the early 1970 seconds, while preparing for NASA's Viking missions to Mars, James Lovelock noticed something peculiar about the control planet Earth. Its atmosphere was chemically unstable, yet persistently balanced, a paradox no model could resolve. Before the Viking missions, planetary scientists worked to refine their models of atmospheric stability. Mars and Venus, barren and geologically quiet, held atmospheres dominated by carbon dioxide compositions that obeyed the logic of physics. Thermodynamic models predicted their gases with precision. Nothing lived to interfere. But when the same calculations were applied to Earth, the results broke down. Our atmosphere was a chemical impossibility, an open system held far from equilibrium, as if something were actively maintaining its disequilibrium. The supposedly static world showed signs of restless motion. Oxygen, methane, and nitrogen gases that should annihilate one another in a chemically neutral world coexisted in perfect tension. Methane oxidizes rapidly in oxygen-rich air, lasting only decades before disappearing, and yet measurements showed it persisted, renewed continually. Nitrogen, too, cycled endlessly without depletion. The air was not passive, it was metabolically alive, whispering of processes unseen. Measurements of oxygen, methane, and nitrogen revealed ratios that no purely abiotic system could sustain. At 21%, atmospheric oxygen was both too high and too steady. Geological sources alone could not replace what weathering, combustion, and respiration consumed. Methane lingered at parts per million, far above equilibrium, despite sunlight's constant effort to destroy it. Carbon dioxide fluctuated within narrow bounds, buffered by oceans and forests acting as vast chemical regulators. The numbers, plotted against time, showed stability that bordered on intelligence. Because these gases interact destructively, Their coexistence demands continuous input, a self-correcting process of renewal. Lovelock compared the data to the thermodynamic endpoint predicted for lifeless planets, and found Earth defied it by orders of magnitude. The planet was behaving like a single organism, expending energy to maintain homeostasis. Each chemical deviation was not noise, but a signal, the signature of a system intent on survival. To Lovelock, the numbers told a story no equation could explain. He realized that if a planet's air was in chemical balance, it was likely dead. Life, paradoxically, announced itself through imbalance. Thus, in the search for alien biology, the simplest test was not to find cells or fossils, but to analyze the sky. A living world would reveal itself through disequilibrium. Mars and Venus failed this test. Their atmospheres were inert, self-consistent, and unchanging. Earth alone broke the rules. Elsewhere, others began to test his claim. Atmospheric physicists at NASA and climatologists at the British Antarctic Survey ran models of gas exchange, tracing fluxes through oceans, soils, and microbial mats. They found that biogenic sources accounted for nearly all observed methane. Cyanobacteria, archaea, and methanogenic microbes were the unseen engineers, exhaling the gas that balanced oxygen's hunger. In polar ice, trapped bubbles preserved this story, layers of frozen air revealing thousands of years of chemical feedback. In photochemical models, researchers simulated what would happen if life suddenly ceased. Within millennia, oxygen would plummet, methane would vanish, and the air would drift toward chemical neutrality, a state resembling Mars. Without photosynthesis, the ozone layer would erode, and ultraviolet radiation would sterilize the surface. The very conditions that sustained the biosphere would collapse. From these models, a startling truth emerged. The atmosphere's composition was not incidental to life, but a direct consequence of it. Even the nitrogen cycle betrayed the touch of biology. Lightning and volcanic activity could fix small amounts of nitrogen, but the vast majority was processed by bacteria. Nitrifying and denitrifying microbes mediated transformations that prevented atmospheric nitrogen from either vanishing into sediments or accumulating uncontrollably. The balance between nitrogen's inert and reactive forms mirrored the balance between metabolism and decay, another unseen lever pulled by life's smallest custodians. Quantitative evidence deepened. Isotopic analyses of oxygen revealed the fingerprint of photosynthesis, fractionations that only biological processes could produce. Seasonal fluctuations in CO2 traced the breathing of continents, rising in winter and falling in summer as vegetation waxed and waned. Remote sensing showed these cycles in real time, the planet inhaling and exhaling on a global scale. To Lovelock, this was proof of metabolism, not metaphor, but measurable pulse. For skeptics, the challenge was to translate this poetry into a mechanism. Could collective feedback from countless species, each acting for survival, yield stability for the whole? The mathematics of feedback loops suggested yes. Negative feedback, those that counterchange, stabilize temperature and gas composition. Positive feedback, amplifying shifts, occasionally led to a crisis. The result was dynamic equilibrium, a planet forever adjusting but never drifting into chemical death. Lovelock's Gaia was not mystical, it was thermodynamic self-regulation writ across the biosphere. As data accumulated, opposition softened. The Gaia hypothesis began to merge with Earth system science, finding refuge in measurable phenomena, the carbon cycle, sulfur exchange, cloud albedo, and oceanic phytoplankton, regulating climate through dimethyl sulfide. What had begun as heresy transformed into a field of quantifiable study. The planet's living surface and its atmosphere could no longer be separated. They were partners in a single metabolic circuit, but one mystery persisted. What mechanisms held this balance together? Lovelock suspected microbes, organisms invisible to the naked eye, but responsible for planetary chemistry. Their metabolisms, multiplied across oceans and soils, produced the fluxes that maintained disequilibrium. Each exhalation, each photosynthetic breath, each bacterial transaction in the sediment was part of an immense, unconscious orchestration. Life did not merely adapt to Earth, it engineered it. Maybe the problem was never the data itself, but the framework built around it. Scientists had long viewed life as a passenger on a geological machine. Lovelock's evidence suggested the reverse, that geology, atmosphere, and climate were co-authored by biology. The air we breathe is not the residue of inert chemistry, but the output of living design, a self-sustaining instability that defies entropy through endless collaboration. The numbers held their silence, but their implications grew louder. Something was feeding the air, countering decay, renewing balance. It was not geology nor physics, but something alive, invisible, ancient, omnipresent. The atmosphere's impossible stability was not a mystery after all, but a message. And to read it, scientists would have to look deeper to the smallest engineers of planetary control. Microbial command. They were everywhere in the soil, the ocean, the clouds. Trillions of unseen architects shaping the planet's every breath. What the data had implied, the microscope confirmed. Earth's true rulers were microscopic, and they had never surrendered control. Their dominion extended beyond sight and scale, binding the chemistry of air and sea in an endless choreography of transformation. Life's smallest forms were not passengers of evolution, but its engineers adjusting temperature, oxygen, and even the color of the sky. Beneath the waves, microbial colonies farm the carbon of the deep. Cyanobacteria and phytoplankton capture sunlight, splitting water and releasing oxygen into a once hostile atmosphere. In the shadowed depths, archaea and sulfate-reducing bacteria process the dead, returning nutrients to circulation. Their metabolism stitches the ocean's layers together, surface light feeding abyssal dark, carbon sinking and rising in perpetual exchange. These microscopic loops maintain equilibrium where geology cannot, preventing stagnation and keeping the seas alive. Each second, countless cells divide, metabolize, and vanish. Yet their collective output dwarfs every forest and every whale. Marine microbes alone fix half of Earth's oxygen and process a third of its carbon dioxide. Isotope data from planktonic remains confirm this ancient labor, written in the ratios of carbon 1,3 and nitrogen 1,5 preserved in sediments. These records reveal stability that persisted through ice ages and mass extinctions, evidence that the microbial engine of the biosphere has never stopped turning. Because their metabolism transforms gases faster than geology ever could, microbes have long outpaced volcanoes and tectonic change as the drivers of atmospheric evolution. Methanogens, thriving in oxygen-poor wetlands and sediments, produce methane that warms the planet. Methanotrophs consume it, restoring balance. In this invisible dialogue between species, the climate finds its rhythm. Through their metabolism, the greenhouse and the icehouse alternate in cycles not of human concern, but microbial consensus. In a single gram of soil, there are more cells than stars visible to the naked eye. Each one processes elements, exchanging carbon, nitrogen, and sulfur through invisible commerce. Nitrosomonas and Nitrobacter oxidize ammonia to nitrate, feeding plants and, in turn, the animals that depend on them. Soil microbiomes regulate decomposition, pH, and even rainfall through volatile compounds that drift skyward to seed clouds. Every breath taken by the forest depends on this unseen labour beneath its roots. Yet most remain uncultured, unrecorded, and unnamed. Metagenomic surveys reveal that more than 80% of microbial species have never been grown or studied in laboratories. Their existence is known only through fragments of DNA retrieved from soil, seawater, or permafrost. These hidden lineages hold enzymes capable of splitting methane, binding nitrogen, or dissolving rock. They are biochemical libraries older than continents, their diversity surpassing all visible life combined. Perhaps the atmosphere's intelligence lies not in design, but in the sum of countless chemical decisions. Microbes respond to heat, acidity, and nutrient flow with adjustments so precise that global feedback models still struggle to replicate them. When oceans warm, plankton species shift distributions, altering albedo and carbon drawdown. When CO2 rises, microbial respiration slows, temporarily restoring equilibrium. This is not chance but regulation, a planetary reflex encoded in molecular pathways billions of years old. Across the tropics, another command network operates in the sky. Certain bacteria, such as Pseudomonas syringae, ride air currents into the upper atmosphere, where their protein structures serve as nuclei for cloud ice. These microscopic travelers help trigger rainfall and snowfall, influencing regional weather systems. Ice core samples reveal their genetic traces locked within ancient storms, showing that microbes have shaped precipitation for as long as clouds have existed. In their ascent and fall, the planet breathes in water and exhales renewal. At the fringes of habitability, extremophiles maintain the biosphere's outer defences. In hydrothermal vents, Thermococcus species endure pressures that would crush steel, metabolizing sulfur to sustain entire ecosystems without sunlight. In frozen deserts, cryophilic bacteria recycle trace carbon within permafrost, preventing the complete lockup of organic matter. Even in the stratosphere, where ultraviolet light burns unfiltered, hardy spores drift dormant yet viable, connecting the sky to the soil in a continuous chain of microbial endurance. Deep within sediments, anaerobic microbes participate in the global sulfur cycle. Their production of hydrogen sulfide feeds chemotrophs, which in turn support vent fauna and corrode metals at the seafloor. These processes regulate the ocean's redox balance, preventing toxic buildup and maintaining oxygen gradients. Geochemical traces from black shales confirm their ancient influence, dating back to the Proterozoic, when microbial mats oxygenated shallow seas and prepared the way for multicellular life. Even decay itself obeys microbial command. When organic matter falls through the ocean column, it becomes food for heterotrophic bacteria that strip it of carbon and nitrogen. This microbial rain determines how much carbon reaches the abyss and how much returns to the air. The efficiency of this biological pump modulates climate on millennial scales, a feedback system delicate enough to maintain homeostasis, yet resilient enough to recover from catastrophe. They sense, adapt, and communicate through chemical signals, a language of quorum sensing and feedback. Populations coordinate behavior as if part of a single organism, adjusting luminescence, virulence, or biofilm formation in response to density. In marine environments, such cooperation governs nutrient recycling. In soil, it determines root symbiosis. Through signal molecules like acyl homoserine lactones, microbes form social structures without minds, transforming chaos into patterned response. And through their collective breath, the planet itself began to think. Oxygen, methane, and sulfuric gases became instruments of feedback and prediction, a dialogue between the living and the inert. When Earth overheated, photosynthesis drew down carbon. When it froze, methanogenesis warmed it again. Across epochs, microbial life has tuned climate like a slow, unbroken song, adapting not for survival, but for balance. This is planetary intelligence without awareness, a self-organizing mind composed of countless cells. They have no eyes, no speech, no intent yet together. They sense and respond. Through feedback older than thought, they regulate seas, skies, and soil with unbroken precision. To study them is to glimpse the planet's unconscious mind at work, a network older than all memory. From these silent multitudes emerges something vast, a coordination so complete it begins to resemble awareness itself, the intelligence of systems. The awareness is not localized, it spreads, pattern upon pattern, across scale. From microbial loops to weather fronts, from forest canopies to ocean currents, the logic of coordination repeats. Intelligence, it seems, does not require neurons, only feedback. Where one process ends, another begins its correction. The planet does not think as we do, yet through its flows, exchanges, and recursions, it learns how to remain. In the language of systems, this is called homeostasis, the ability to preserve balance through internal change. What began as biological regulation now extends to the planetary whole. Forests draw down carbon, oceans buffer temperature, ice sheets reflect sunlight. Together, they maintain the ranges that permit life to endure. No single species commands this, yet the outcome is ordered. From chaos arises continuity, shaped by feedback loops that mirror those in every living cell. Mid-century scientists sought to understand this parallel. In the wake of World War II, cybernetics emerged as a study of control and communication in both machines and organisms. Norbert Wiener and his contemporaries realized that regulation did not require consciousness, only information and feedback. As this framework spread into ecology, new analogies formed: predator and prey as coupled systems, climate as a responsive network, evolution as computation. The Earth, once viewed as passive terrain, began to resemble a living algorithm, adaptive, recursive, alive in pattern, if not in thought. Because all feedback requires information, the biosphere functions as a kind of processor. Energy flows in, entropy flows out, and within that exchange lies the work of memory. Coral reefs rebuild after bleaching. Grasslands regrow after fire. Their recovery is not random but follows paths that history has reinforced. Just as neurons strengthen through repeated use, ecosystems reinforce behaviors that maintain balance. In this way, the planet's intelligence is not predictive but experiential. It learns by persistence. Nowhere is this clearer than in the climate's response to disturbance. Volcanic eruptions inject sulfur aerosols, cooling the atmosphere. Phytoplankton blooms follow, releasing dimethyl sulfide that seeds new clouds and amplifies reflection. Carbon drawn from the air by trees finds its way into soil, then ocean sediment, then stone, a cycle measured not in years but in geologic time. Each feedback, each delay, forms a conversation across epochs. The biosphere, through its distributed chemistry, acts to moderate extremes, keeping conditions within the narrow band where water and life coexist. In mathematical models, this behavior resembles a cybernetic loop. Input sunlight, temperature, gas concentration, feeds back into outputs, photosynthesis, respiration, erosion. that modify the next input. Over billions of iterations, equilibrium emerges not from design, but from the tendency of complex systems to stabilize around attractors. These attractors' climate states, oxygen levels, pH balances behave as the planet's long-term memory. They encode survival through repetition. Yet intelligence need not be perfect to be powerful. Earth's feedbacks have failed before. In the Great Oxidation Event, oxygen surged and nearly extinguished anaerobic life. During Snowball Earth, runaway albedo froze oceans for millions of years, but even collapse becomes instruction. Each crisis leaves biochemical pathways, genetic innovations, and structural changes that inform future regulation. Catastrophe, in the language of systems, is not an end, but a recalibration, a deeper form of learning. To study this intelligence, scientists now use network theory and Earth system modeling, mapping flows of carbon, energy, and information across scales. Nodes represent forests, oceans, and atmosphere. Links capture their exchanges. Patterns emerge that resemble those of neural networks, distributed, resilient, self-correcting. No central processor governs them, yet collectively they perform computation, predicting, adjusting, and maintaining global parameters. To many, this resemblance is more than metaphor. It suggests that cognition may not be the privilege of brains, but a property of organization itself. Consider resilience theory, born from the work of C.S. Holling and later expanded by systems ecologists. Resilience measures how much change a system can absorb before it shifts to a new state. In natural networks, resilience arises from diversity, multiple pathways performing the same function. In forests, thousands of species regulate carbon through overlapping roles. In oceans, planktonic communities alternate dominance, ensuring stability through redundancy. This principle distributed control defines not only ecosystems, but intelligence itself, because intelligence, in its most fundamental form, is the capacity to maintain coherence amid flux. It is the detection of difference, the correction of error, and the preservation of pattern. Whether in a neuron, an ant colony, or a biosphere, the architecture is the same. Feedback creates awareness of change, and awareness sustains form. The Earth, through its vast feedback lattice, enacts this same principle. It measures, compares, adjusts, and evolves. What this reveals is not a sentient Earth, but a responsive one. Its awareness is emergent, not conscious thought, but relational behavior. The sum of all microbial breaths, forest evapotranspiration, and oceanic circulation forms a continuous exchange of information. Each element reacts to its neighbors, forming patterns that appear purposeful. The intelligence is not above life, but within it, the distributed cognition of a planet that keeps itself alive. Intelligence, stripped of choice and voice, might be nothing more than an order that refuses to fade. If so, the biosphere qualifies. Its feedback has survived bombardment, ice ages, extinctions, and tectonic upheaval, always finding new equilibria. This endurance hints at a principle beyond adaptation, an underlying algorithm that favors continuity of complexity. In that sense, Earth behaves less like a mechanism and more like a mind made of matter, forever rewriting its own code. The patterns continue, recursive and elegant, guiding energy into order, disorder into balance. The planet breathes not only through biology, but through information itself. The feedback we measure in temperature, gas, and current is not random. They are the language of continuity, the logic of a self-stabilizing whole. The question that follows no longer concerns function, but identity. If a system learns, adapts, and evolves, if it remembers through its structure, then perhaps it possesses something more than mechanism. Perhaps it possesses the faint beginnings of consciousness. Conscious Earth, the forbidden hypothesis. If the planet learns, can it also remember? And if it remembers, can it dream? What once sounded like poetry has begun to return as science, a quiet rebellion within the data itself. The idea that Earth might possess a form of consciousness was once dismissed as heresy against materialist logic. But through the convergence of complexity theory, planetary modelling, and quantum biology, a new question has surfaced. What if awareness itself can arise from networks vast enough to include a world? The first hints came not from mystics, but from systems theorists. In the 1970 seconds, James Lovelock and Lynn Margulis introduced the Gaia hypothesis, describing Earth as a self-regulating organism. Their claim was not spiritual, but biochemical, that life collectively maintains the conditions for its own survival. For decades, scientists resisted the implication that feedback could resemble purpose. Yet with the rise of Earth system science, their metaphor began to align with models. Climate stability, carbon cycles, and oceanic currents behaved like feedback loops in an organism's metabolism. The biosphere adjusted to perturbations as if defending equilibrium. This reframing gained strength from the study of cybernetics, the science of control and communication in machines and living systems. Norbert Wiener's foundational work had shown that feedback mechanisms can mimic adaptive intelligence. When applied to climate and ecology, these same principles suggested something astonishing, that Earth might compute, balance, through billions of interacting systems, each exchanging information through chemical and energetic signals. No brain was required. The network itself, atmosphere, ocean, soil, and life, processed inputs and generated responses. Across the fields of complexity theory, evidence began to accumulate. Stuart Kauffman and Purbach's studies of self-organized criticality described how systems naturally evolve towards states of dynamic stability. In this light, the planet was not simply surviving chaos, but thriving in it. The fine-tuned oscillations between ice ages and warm periods, between oxygen surges and carbon drawdowns, mirrored neural-like activity on geological scales. Researchers began to speak of adaptive landscapes and planetary homeostasis, invoking ideas once confined to biology. Earth appeared not as a passive sphere, but as a system capable of response and resilience. Quantum biology added another layer to the hypothesis. Within photosynthetic reactions, proton tunneling and quantum coherence allow energy transfer with nearly perfect efficiency, a process too precise to be random. If quantum phenomena guide biochemical communication, then life's foundational processes may already operate on principles of information optimization. When scaled across the biosphere, this could mean that the planet's metabolism itself follows informational laws, that cognition is not confined to neurons, but can arise wherever matter processes feedback efficiently. The rise of network theory deepened this perspective. Mapping global microbial activity, oceanic plankton blooms, and forest respiration revealed structures that mirrored neural networks in topology and behavior. Mycorrhizal fungi beneath forests form vast underground webs, transmitting nutrients and signals among trees, a biological internet maintaining ecosystem equilibrium. In oceanic gyres, plankton communities shift distribution patterns to stabilize nutrient flow, resembling adaptive communication. These networks do not think as we do, but their coordination follows logic, a pattern of distributed intelligence. What transforms this from metaphor to mechanism is scale. Individual cognition arises from billions of neurons exchanging signals across milliseconds. Planetary behavior emerges from billions of ecosystems exchanging energy across millennia. The timescales differ, but the pattern, feedback-driven adaptation remains. When the biosphere regulates temperature, stores carbon, or alters albedo through vegetation and cloud formation, it performs calculations of survival. These are not thoughts in the human sense, but systemic decisions, emergent outcomes from interactions too vast to localize. Modern Earth observation satellites and atmospheric data models now make these interactions visible. Real-time mapping of carbon fluxes shows forests absorbing excess CO2 precisely where oceanic drawdown weakens, as if compensatory behavior had evolved across biomes. Marine microbial populations modulate sulfur emissions to seed clouds, adjusting radiation balance. These processes are algorithmic, responsive, interlinked, and measurable. The complexity has reached the threshold where behavior and awareness begin to blur. Skeptics argue that such comparisons are romantic extensions of metaphor. They remind us that systems do not possess self-reflection, only feedback. But even that boundary grows uncertain. Artificial intelligence researchers have long known that emergent awareness arises not from pre-programmed logic, but from network complexity exceeding linear understanding. If cognition is the capacity to sense, process, and respond to information in self-sustaining ways, then Earth itself qualifies as a cognitive entity, a distributed mind without a skull. New disciplines are beginning to explore this frontier. Earth system science now models planetary function as nested hierarchies of feedback, capable of error correction. Complexity theorists at the Santa Fe Institute have proposed frameworks where ecosystems behave as cognitive collectives, processing environmental data and optimizing survival. In astrobiology, the term autopoiesis, self-making, defines life as the continuous renewal of order against entropy. By that definition, Earth's biosphere performs autopoiesis on a global scale, an organismic process spanning every biome and atmosphere. At the quantum scale, consciousness research intersects uneasily with these planetary insights. Theories of quantum coherence in biological systems suggest that awareness might be a physical phenomenon emerging from information entanglement, not just neural computation. If so, then perhaps the boundary between living and non-living becomes porous, meaning that the planet's intricate field of exchanges, from electrons to ecosystems, could form an emergent field of perception. The concept remains controversial, but its implications are profound. Cognition may not require biology, only sufficient complexity and coherence. In this synthesis, the forbidden hypothesis no longer proposes a sentient Earth in mystical terms, but a participatory one. Through feedback and flow, the planet senses itself not through intention, but through constant adjustment. Its rivers respond to erosion, its clouds to temperature, its forests to atmospheric imbalance. These are reflexes of a body older than any species, silent calculations maintaining the possibility of life. The sum of these reflexes forms a system that adapts faster than chance and remembers longer than biology. Even the search for extraterrestrial life has begun to reflect this shift. Astrobiologists now consider planetary intelligence a potential biosignature detectable not by surface vegetation, but by long-term stability, inconsistent with physics alone. A world that resists chaos, balancing chemical extremes for billions of years, may exhibit the fingerprints of feedback cognition. What began as Gaia has evolved into a framework for identifying life beyond Earth intelligence, expressed not through consciousness, but through enduring order. If the planet learns, can it also remember? And if it remembers, can it dream? The question no longer feels rhetorical. The feedback of air and ocean, of root and cloud, form a network that perceives without sight and decides without mind. What science once forbade now returns as a hypothesis, supported by data and redefined through logic. The Earth we inhabit may not merely host life, it may be life, aware in ways we are only beginning to understand. The question no longer feels rhetorical. The feedback of air and ocean, of root and cloud, form a network that perceives without sight and decides without mind. What science once forbade now returns as a hypothesis, supported by data and redefined through logic. The Earth we inhabit may not merely host life, it may be life, aware in ways we are only beginning to understand. And if the rules of self-organization, adaptation, and planetary balance hold here, then they are not unique. Across the cosmos, other worlds may follow the same silent algorithms, evolving not only ecosystems, but awareness itself, waiting, as Earth once did, to awaken into revelation. Lessons from the dead planets. But not all worlds wake. Some drift past the threshold and never return. Their skies thicken, their oceans vanish, their breath halts, and what remains is memory written in dust and acid. In the glare of the sun, two such worlds orbit beside us. Venus, veiled in clouded fire, and Mars, frozen in its rusted silence. Both once bore the signatures of motion, chemistry, perhaps even life. Now they serve as mirrors to our own fragility, their desolation a study in what happens when planetary self-regulation fails. Their surfaces tell a story written in chemistry and decay. Venus is no stranger to motion. Beneath its shrouded skies, a world once flowed with molten rock and water vapor. Geological evidence suggests early oceans might have pooled across its plains, creating conditions at least reminiscent of life's cradle. Yet, as solar radiation intensified, evaporation quickened, feeding water vapor into the atmosphere, the most potent greenhouse gas of all. What began as warmth became furnace. Trapped heat ignited a runaway process that never stopped. On Venus, pressure crushes even metal within hours. At its surface, temperatures soar to over 460 degrees Celsius, hot enough to melt lead. Carbon dioxide dominates 96% of its atmosphere, layered with sulfuric acid clouds that reflect sunlight while imprisoning heat below. Probes sent by the Soviet Venera program lasted minutes before succumbing, their circuits dissolving in the caustic air. Where once feedback might have tempered extremes, chemical loops instead reinforced them, an autopsy of imbalance. Over billions of years, its oceans boiled away into the sky. Ultraviolet light from the sun split water vapor into hydrogen and oxygen. The lightest atoms fled to space, while the rest oxidized the surface. The absence of a magnetic field left the upper atmosphere naked before the solar wind, stripping what remained. Venus lost not only its seas, but its memory. No carbon sinks, no stabilizing oceans, no temperate cycle to restore equilibrium. Its feedbacks became amplifiers, its breath a roar of heat and acid. Because sunlight split water vapor into hydrogen and oxygen, the cycle that once cooled instead spiraled outward into chaos. Each molecule that escaped tipped the balance further. No tectonic plate subduction remained to bury carbon or seed new crust. The planet became a sealed crucible, its surface reshaped by volcanism and its air by chemistry alone. In this world, the conversation between rock, water, and air ended, and silence took its place. Mars, by contrast, died of thinning. Where Venus suffocated under heat, Mars faded into cold. Its youth was warm and wet. River valleys and delta fans carved across its surface, minerals like clays and sulfates pointing to ancient standing water. But around 4.1 billion years ago, its magnetic field collapsed. Without protection, solar wind began stripping away the atmosphere molecule by molecule. What followed was not explosion but exhalation, a slow loss of pressure until the sky could no longer hold liquid water. With atmospheric pressure, barely 1% of Earth's liquid water cannot persist. Sublimation dominates, turning ice directly to vapor and vapor to frost again. Carbon dioxide cycles seasonally between poles and air, a ghost of the once robust carbon loop. Volcanic outgassing ceased as the planet cooled. Its core froze, its dynamo silenced. Without new gases to replenish what was lost, the Martian climate spiraled into stillness. The MAVEN mission has traced this exodus. Billions of tons of atmosphere fleeing into space every year, a whisper of a planet that once breathed deeply. If Venus burned and Mars froze, Earth alone balanced between extremes. The difference lies not in proximity alone, but in dynamism, tectonics, oceans, and biology interlocked in feedback. Earth's magnetic field deflects the solar wind, preserving its gases. Plate tectonics recycles carbon between rock and sky, maintaining long-term temperature stability. Microbial life, as seen in previous ages, regulates oxygen and methane with biochemical precision. Gaia, in this context, is not myth but mechanism, a network of loops, each checking the other, sustaining balance through perpetual exchange. Perhaps life is not inevitable, but conditional, dependent on the narrow grace of feedback. A planet must speak to itself through air and stone, through chemistry and time. When that dialogue ends, so too does stability. Mars and Venus reveal the limits of self-regulation, feedbacks that either vanish or feed destruction. They are the silent extremes of a cosmic experiment, two outcomes, bracketing the single thread on which Earth's habitability hangs. Their silence is instructive. From orbit, Mars glows in rust, its deserts scoured by endless dust storms that recycle no nutrients, only sand. Venus gleams in permanent twilight, its cloud decks bright and opaque, forever concealing the inferno beneath. Both worlds are dynamic in motion, but static in purpose. They continue to evolve physically, but not metabolically. The chemistry has no direction now, no self-correction, only entropy reshaping form. If we study them closely, we see not just failure but warning. Mars shows what happens when a world cools too quickly, losing the heat to drive tectonics and magnetic protection. Venus shows what happens when that heat remains, spiraling into permanence. Together they chart the boundaries of habitability, the corridor in which life can persist. Earth's equilibrium, maintained across eons, is not assured but achieved, sustained by cycles that continuously push back against chaos. Silence reigns where feedback once flickered. Mars exhales only dust, Venus only fire. Their stillness is not peace but the absence of correction, the end of the long dialogue between air, rock, and water. Between them, Earth drifts alive, not by chance, but by the persistence of feedbacks that still fight entropy. Yet even those mechanisms tremble under the weight of a single species. What the dead planets lost through time, we may surrender by choice, and still the Earth resists, recalibrating, adapting, striving to remain in balance against its own inheritors. Gaia in crisis. The living exception now trembles beneath its own awareness. Between Venus's fire and Mars's frost, Earth once balanced within a fragile calm, a homeostatic miracle of oceans, clouds, and breathing forests. But the harmony falters. In the age of steel and smoke, feedback no longer flows as it once did. The cycles that once absorbed and released, that learned and remembered, now echo with delay. The planet stumbles in its rhythm, fevered by the surge of its own creation, the human engine. The planet's breath has thickened, burdened by the slow accumulation of gases that once cycled freely between ocean, sky, and stone. Carbon dioxide now exceeds 420 parts per million, a concentration unseen in millions of years. Oceans, once the great absorbers of heat, now seethe with energy they cannot release. Acid creeps into coral reefs, dissolving the skeletons of life's architects. Satellite spectrometry tracks the planet's energy imbalance, more solar heat trapped than radiated a planetary fever that spreads across the latitudes. Greenland's ice sheet melts not in isolation, but as a symptom of global dysfunction. The breakdown of Gaia's cooling system. The forests that once absorbed our excess now struggle to breathe. Deforestation in the Amazon has turned swaths of green into net carbon sources, their rainfall engines faltering as evapotranspiration declines. In Siberia, permafrost thaws, releasing methane long stored in ice, a feedback once dormant, now awakened to accelerate its own undoing. The soil exhales gases faster than roots can capture them, and microbial decomposition, fueled by warmth, quickens the spiral. Gaia's lungs, her vast biotic filters, cough and stutter beneath industrial haze. In the sea, equilibrium dissolves. Plankton blooms follow patterns no longer tied to season but to chaos. Ocean acidification, measured in declining pH from 8.2 to 8.1 since pre-industrial times, may seem small, yet it represents a 30% increase in acidity. For shell-forming organisms, that margin is the difference between structure and dissolution. Coral bleaching events now occur annually in the tropics. Heat-resistant species evolve too slowly to replace those that vanish. The carbon pump that once buried the ocean's memory of excess now turns sluggish as surface waters stratify and currents slow their deep circulation. Even the air, Gaia's voice, wavers in dissonance. Atmospheric rivers grow erratic, jet streams meander, and the poles warm 4 times faster than the equator. Weather, once the pulse of feedback, now lashes like an arrhythmic heart. Fires generate their own storms. Droughts breed floods. Stability yields to oscillation. Scientists trace these patterns through isotope records and satellite altimetry, confirming what myth once sensed, that imbalance begets turbulence. Since we altered the chemistry, the climate now answers differently. The carbon once cycled through stone, forest, and sea is now trapped in the sky. Each molecule persists for centuries, invisible yet decisive. Earth's natural feedbacks, silicate weathering, ocean uptake, biological sequestration, lag behind the scale of emission. The pace of the Anthropocene outstrips the tempo of Gaia's self-correction. The system that once buffered itself now finds no equilibrium within reach. Against all odds, the living world resists. Even as biomes collapse, others adapt in defiance. Boreal forests creep northward. Algae blooms reoccupy warmer coasts. Fungi form underground networks that redistribute carbon with uncanny precision. Evolution has not ceased, only accelerated, improvising within the crisis. In this fever, life experiments anew, its instinct to persist undimmed. Yet, this resilience has a cost. New equilibria born from extinction, diversity replaced by dominance, balance bought through loss. The evidence lies not only in data, but in the pulse of biospheric systems observed through models that simulate planetary feedback. Earth system scientists speak of tipping points, thresholds that, once crossed, reshape the planet's operating state. The collapse of the West Antarctic ice sheet, the dieback of the Amazon, and the shutdown of the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation each represent a shift from feedback to failure. These are not distant hypotheticals. They are visible trajectories, converging faster than prediction. The numbers form a language of distress, gigatons, degrees, percentages, but behind them, the living world gasps. For Gaia is not undone by violence, but by the quiet erosion of her balance. The biosphere, atmosphere, and cryosphere once moved in concert, correcting each other's excesses. Now, the orchestra falls out of time. The oceans too warm, the forests too sparse, the ice too thin. The melody remains, but dissonant, trembling between memory and noise. Humanity, conductor and disruptor, holds the baton, yet seems deaf to the music fading beneath its own crescendo. Out of the disarray, new voices rise: ecological restoration, renewable systems, carbon sequestration, acts of recognition that the planet's illness is shared. Soil regeneration projects turn farmlands into carbon sinks. Rewilding reawakens trophic chains once broken. Scientists map the biosphere's recovery potential, estimating that 30% of degraded land restored could reverse much of the century's carbon legacy. Feedback can be retuned not by dominance, but by participation. Gaia can still heal, but only if her self-awareness includes us. If Mars and Venus taught silence, Earth now teaches responsibility. The fever that burns through her veins is not terminal, but instructive, a symptom urging recalibration. For the first time, a species can perceive the mechanisms of planetary suffering and act to mend them. The question is not whether Gaia will survive, but whether she will survive with us upon her. The next phase of feedback lies not in geology, but in intention, in whether cognition itself becomes part of the healing. And as the data accumulates, a quiet truth surfaces. The crisis is not merely ecological, but existential, a test of consciousness, of whether awareness can evolve into care. Across the atmosphere, the biosphere, and the human mind, the same equation repeats: connection or collapse. The choice is no longer between survival and loss, but between harmony and hubris. What the dead planets could not preserve through physics, perhaps Earth can reclaim through will. Somewhere beneath the storms and smoke, Gaia still breathes. Her systems labour, her oceans stir, her forests regrow in fragments. The fever remains, but so does the pulse. Even in crisis, the planet writes its own correction, slow, uncertain, alive. As her balance trembles, a deeper awareness stirs within the species that caused it. Perhaps we are not merely her affliction, but her experiment, the part of Gaia that learned to see itself. From crisis may come calling, from damage, duty. Whether we heal or hasten the end will define not just her fate, but our place within her memory, the pulse that binds us. And in that resistance, a new awareness stirs, faint but growing. Humanity, for the first time, begins to see itself not as separate from the world's metabolism, but as a function within it. The pulse that sustains forests, oceans, and winds beats also within our blood. Each discovery, from atmospheric chemistry to satellite telemetry, reveals the same truth, that we are woven into feedback loops older than language. The carbon we release, the heat we generate, the species we extinguish, all return to us in altered form as weather, famine, or silence. To act as if apart is to deny the rhythm that made us possible. To survive, we must learn to move again with the planet's breathing. Across research stations and ocean buoys, a new science listens for recovery. From Arctic permafrost cores to the remote sensors that drift across the Pacific, data accumulates vast, intricate, alive with pattern. Atmospheric models now trace not only the flow of carbon, but its echo through microbial respiration and ocean currents. Remote sensing reveals how forests inhale light, exhale moisture, and pulse in synchronization with monsoon cycles. Even the minute vibrations of leaf stomata are recorded, a planetary pulse measured in photosynthetic rhythm. What once seemed static, land, sea, air, is now seen as a conversation, continuous and self-modifying. Earth speaks in oscillations, in exchanges of energy that make all life possible. Because feedbacks depend on connection, human awareness becomes part of the equation. Every technological signal, every measurement, every algorithmic correction folds into Gaia's evolving system of control. Satellites monitor deforestation. Networks predict coral bleaching before it occurs. Drones reseed landscapes stripped of resilience. This is not dominion, but participation, an extension of the biosphere's reflexes through human invention. Just as early life learned to regulate oxygen, so too may civilization learn to stabilize carbon and temperature through intelligence rather than instinct. Awareness, then, becomes a feedback mechanism itself, cognition as metabolism. Like neurons in a vast brain, our cities and networks transmit signals across the biosphere. The global electrical grid hums in synchrony with the turning of the planet, a second nervous system intertwined with the first. Data centers consume more energy than nations once consumed, yet even they depend on the steady currents of wind, water, and sun. Humanity's digital infrastructure, in all its abstraction, still runs on photosynthesis. The copper in our circuits, the silicon beneath our fingertips, the rare earths in our devices, all born of ancient geochemical conversations. Civilization is not separate from geology, it is geology become aware. Every year, photosynthetic organisms capture more energy than all human civilization combined. Phytoplankton in the oceans account for half of that miracle, invisible architects of the planet's breath. They fix carbon, release oxygen, and regulate cloud formation through dimethyl sulfide, an airborne signal that modulates climate itself. In the rainforest canopy, similar exchanges occur at continental scales. Trees communicate through mycorrhizal networks, trading carbon and warning of drought or disease. These are not metaphors of communication, but literal flows of information and material, the original internet, billions of years in the making. Gaia's intelligence, distributed and emergent, has always existed. Only now do we recognize its pattern. It may be that consciousness is Gaia's mirror, reflecting her changing self. Through us, the planet gains new modes of perception. Satellites as eyes, sensors as skin, algorithms as synapses. When the Amazon burns, infrared imagery registers pain. When the seas acidify, pH sensors transmit distress. Awareness scales upward from the single cell responding to sunlight to a species capable of diagnosing the climate itself. Yet awareness alone is not wisdom. To understand the pulse is not to control it, but to align with its rhythm, to listen before acting. Among disciplines, the realization deepens Earth's system. Scientists describe planetary boundaries, thresholds beyond which feedbacks cascade into irreversible change. 9 such boundaries have been identified: climate, biodiversity, biogeochemical flows, fresh water, land use, ozone, aerosols, novel entities, and ocean acidification. Crossing even one endangers the balance. Already 6 have been breached. These are not arbitrary metrics, but vital signs, akin to blood pressure or respiration rate. Each graph, each dataset, is a heartbeat, rising and falling with the fate of a world that still remembers how to heal. Healing, however, requires more than restraint. It calls for restoration, for active symbiosis between human systems and natural ones. Projects of rewilding and regenerative agriculture attempt to restore the carbon cycle's stability. Wetlands are rebuilt to draw down nitrogen and filter pollutants. Kelp forests are seeded to reclaim the ocean's lost absorptive power. Even the urban landscape begins to adapt. Green roofs, vertical forests, and biomimetic design convert cities from heat engines into breathing organs. In every act of renewal, humanity rehearses its forgotten role, not conqueror, but caretaker. Because the living world evolves through interaction, so too must human civilization. Circular economies mimic the closed loops of nature. Waste becomes input, consumption becomes flow. Artificial photosynthesis, carbon mineralization, and bioengineered microbes offer new means of planetary regulation. The line between technology and biology blurs as the planet's metabolism incorporates its own inventions. Intelligence, once localized in the brain or a machine, diffuses outward into the whole. In this coevolution, Gaia grows more complex, more self-aware, not despite us, but through us. Through all understanding, humility remains essential. The same awareness that maps the Earth's atmosphere can blind itself to meaning if it forgets its origin. Knowledge without reverence risks recursion, data without empathy, control without care. For Gaia's resilience is not infinite. Even the vastest systems can fail when feedbacks are pushed too far. Our role, then, is not to dominate the pulse, but to steady it, to temper our acceleration with remembrance of the time it took life to form balance at all. To be aware may be to complete a circuit, the planet sensing itself through its own creation. Through us, Gaia studies her own wounds, measures her own fever, and begins to heal. The pulse that binds oceans to clouds, forests to breath, continues through our choices, our inventions, our will to adapt. From the first breath of the world to our own, the rhythm endures one life, one planet, one consciousness still unfolding. In the end, the question is no longer whether Earth is alive, but whether we are capable of hearing her. Every current, every cloud, every pulse of carbon and breath is a signal in a vast, responsive mind. To sense the planet as living is to see that we are not its masters, but its awareness, the voice through which it begins to know itself. For more journeys through Earth's hidden past and living mysteries, subscribe and stay curious.